All right, buckle up, listeners. We're diving into a pretty massive change in the EU. Their construction rulebook is getting a complete overhaul.
Yeah, a whole new construction products regulation. We're talking big shifts towards sustainability and a pretty wild digital makeover.
It's a pretty big deal if you're involved in, well, building anything in the EU, or, frankly, if you're just curious about, what the future of construction might look like.
Exactly. And we've got the blueprints right here, including let's just say, a very detailed document from the EU Council itself. It's marked 576-2124 REV1.
What's interesting here is this isn't some minor tweak, The EU is going for a full-on transformation. They're calling it a harmonized zone for all construction products across, get this, all 27 member states. Harmonized zone, catchy, right? But what's that actually mean for, say, someone trying to build a new office in, I don't know, Berlin?
It's about finding that sweet spot between making trade easier and keeping those really strict safety and environmental standards all in line. So think of it this way. A company making steel beams in, say, Portugal, well, once they meet these EU standards, they can ship those beams anywhere, from Lisbon to Helsinki, no problem.
Makes sense, streamlining things.
Yeah.
But this isn't just about paperwork, right? This feels deeply connected to that whole EU Green Deal.
You're absolutely right. The EU sees this as kind of a make-or-break moment for making construction a core part of its sustainability goals. And we all know buildings, they use a ton of resources and create a lot of waste.
So to actually achieve those Green Deal goals, they can't just keep doing what they're doing.
Right. They have to completely change how they build from the ground up.
Okay, hold on a second. Why was this whole shakeup even needed? Was the old 2011 regulation that out of touch?
Basically, yeah. The EU felt like the old system just wasn't working. Remember those harmonized standards we talked about? Developing them was painfully slow. Market surveillance was all over the place. And frankly, the whole thing was about as digital as, well, a hammer.
Time for a digital demolition then.
Exactly.
But why so much emphasis on this sustainability angle? It's everywhere in this new regulation.
It's not just about energy-efficient buildings anymore. It's about shrinking their environmental impact throughout their entire life cycle, from the very beginning to the very end. Or even better, from beginning to beginning again, that whole circular economy idea.
So less demolition and more, how can we use this again?
Yeah.
That's a pretty big shift for an industry, known for concrete.
It is. To make that happen, they're doing something pretty groundbreaking, actually. Mandatory minimum environmental sustainability requirements for every single construction product.
Wait, mandatory? This isn't a suggestion anymore.
Nope. We're talking hard limits, measurable benchmarks for how green a product has to be. Think like how much recycled stuff is in it, limits on hazardous materials, even how easy it is to take apart for reuse later on.
No more slapping a green label on something and calling it a day, huh?
The EU is laying down the law on greenwashing. These rules will be set in stone, literally in those EU delegated acts.
So I'm picturing like a contractor on a job site checking a product against these eco standards. What if something doesn't meet the grade? Is that project dead in the water?
That's where things get interesting. The EU is giving individual countries some flexibility here. They can set even stricter standards than the baseline if they want.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the document even specifically allows for going above and beyond these minimums, but they have to be careful not to create trade barriers within the EU. It's kind of a balancing act.
Sounds like a tough needle to thread. But how will they enforce this across such a, massive market with so many different players?
This is where that green public procurement thing comes into play. Imagine the EU, with all its buying power, saying, if you want to build a school, a hospital, anything public, with our money, you better be using materials that meet these eco standards.
They're using their weight to push the market in a greener direction.
Exactly. Leading by example, or leading by procurement, I guess. The hope is that this starts a ripple effect, and the private sector will just follow suit.
Makes sense, because if companies want those big public contracts,
they'll have to step up their sustainability game.
It's a fascinating way to use market forces to, force environmental change.
Yeah.
But are there any, motivational incentives to get everyone on board?
Oh, definitely. The EU isn't just, using the stick. They're dangling some carrots, too. The regulation actually encourages countries to, roll out the red carpet for those who go above and beyond those minimum requirements.
Okay, like what?
Well, the document is a little vague on specifics, but think maybe tax breaks for using super sustainable materials or getting preferential treatment when bidding on those public projects.
Right.
The idea is to make going green good for business, not just good for the planet.
A win-win in theory.
And this is where the EU's whole digital vision for construction really kicks in. They're introducing this construction digital product passport system.
Okay, a digital passport. That sounds, I don't know, a little futuristic. What are we talking about here?
Think of it like a virtual twin for every construction product, a digital profile with all the details, properties, performance, where it came from, environmental impact, everything.
So a really, really detailed spec sheet, but like digital.
Right.
And it's connected to the actual physical product.
Exactly. And it's not just about storing information. It's about making it instantly available to everyone involved in a construction project. Architects in, say, Rome could see how a batch of sustainable timber from Finland stacks up against those EU standards before it even ships.
Now that's transparency. But this isn't just about making things easier for architects, right?
Right. The big deal here is interoperability. This digital passport system, it's designed to work seamlessly with other platforms, especially the EU's eco-design for sustainable products regulation. All this building information connected and talking to each other.
So this is even bigger than just the construction industry.
Exactly. The EU is really trying to shape a more sustainable, more digitally connected future, one building at a time.
I can see how this could lead to a wave of innovation in construction. I mean, imagine what's possible when every architect, engineer, contractor has this incredible amount of data at their fingertips. Could we get to a point where algorithms are designing buildings that are both sustainable and cost-effective?
Absolutely. Imagine a world where we dramatically reduce waste because architects can design buildings from the start with deconstruction and reuse in mind. It's the circular economy in action.
And what about building inspections years down the line? Will these passports be used to make sure regulations are still being met?
That's a key part of it. The digital passport isn't just about the present. It's a historical record, a way to ensure accountability and plan for the long term.
Okay, I'm getting a better picture of what this digital passport is and why it matters. But who's actually creating and managing all this information?
Well, the document outlines a pretty complex system with checks and balances all along the way. Those technical assessment bodies we talked about earlier, they'll play a crucial role.
Right, the sustainability experts.
Yeah.
So how do they fit into this whole digital landscape?
Their role is even more important now. They're not just evaluating a product's performance anymore. They're making sure the sustainability claims are legit, that everything checks out. They're like the auditors of the digital passport, verifying everything before it's released.
So they're the gatekeepers of the system, ensuring the information is trustworthy. But who's going to enforce all of this in the real world?
The EU is bringing in the big guns for that. Notified bodies, they're called. Independent organizations that are authorized to make sure products meet all the regulations. They do conformity assessments, issue certifications.
A whole army of digital inspectors making sure everything lines up.
Exactly. And don't forget about the market surveillance authorities. They're the ones who will be on the lookout for any shady stuff, any attempts to cheat the system.
Like digital watchdogs, keeping everyone honest. This whole system is incredibly impressive, ambitious. But it also sounds really complex.
It's definitely complex, but it's also a huge opportunity, especially when you think about how it impacts something that often gets overlooked: remanufactured products.
Hold on, remanufactured products. We're not just talking about recycled material.
Right. You're right. It's important to distinguish between the two. Recycling is like taking a car that doesn't run anymore and salvaging the metal to make something new. Remanufacturing is more like taking that same car, rebuilding the engine, making it, like, new again.
Giving existing products a second life, extending their lifespan instead of just starting from scratch.
Exactly.
But how do you even begin to regulate something that's, well, remade?
That's where this new regulation and those digital passports work hand in hand. For the first time, the EU is laying out a clear definition of what counts as a remanufactured product in construction. And guess what's going to be key to verifying a product's remanufacturing journey, making sure the quality is there?
The digital passport.
Bingo! It becomes this record, this proof of where a product has been from its creation to any remanufacturing it goes through. It increases transparency, builds trust in the market, and it also creates a ton of data that can be used for even more innovation in the circular economy down the line.
Talk about thinking ahead. We've covered a lot of ground here. Sustainability standards, digital passports, remanufactured products, the whole shebang. What else is hidden in this massive new EU regulation?
Okay, so we've dug into the plans for this EU construction shakeup, learned about eco-regulations, digital passports, the whole nine yards. But realistically, what's the timeline on all this, and what does it actually mean for, the average person? Should we be worried about construction costs going through the roof, projects getting stuck in digital purgatory?
Well, I wouldn't panic just yet. The EU isn't about to bring construction to a screeching halt. If you look at Article 94, it lays out a timeline, a phased implementation, with the full set of rules coming into effect sometime in 2024.
So there's a bit of breathing room before things really change. But I imagine some people in the industry are, well, feeling a little anxious right now. Absolutely. And those who adapt quickly will definitely have a leg up. Some parts of this, especially those dealing with setting new standards, are already in motion. That gives companies time to get ahead of the game, to start making changes now instead of playing catch up later.
It's a good approach, a gradual shift instead of a sudden stop. But even with that, this level of change is bound to hit a few bumps along the way. What do you think will be the biggest hurdles in rolling this out across such a huge and diverse market?
Enforcement, for sure. It's one thing to write these rules down, it's a whole other thing to actually make sure everyone's following them across 27 different countries, each with its own way of doing things, and, let's be real, varying levels of enthusiasm for this kind of change. Like we talked about, those market surveillance authorities, they have a huge role to play in making sure everyone's competing fairly.
Because if you have these ambitious rules, but some countries are turning a blind eye, it undermines the whole system.
Exactly. And then there's the human factor. Let's be honest, the construction industry isn't exactly known for quickly adopting the latest technology. Getting everyone on board with the digital side of things, architects using AI design tools, contractors constantly uploading information to those digital passports, that's a huge culture shift, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Like any digital transformation, you need everyone on board, not just the fancy new tech. But let's say, for argument's sake, that this does work. Let's say the EU pulls this off. What happens then? Could this change how the whole world builds?
Well, the EU is definitely aiming to be a leader in this space. Think about it. The world's biggest single market, setting a new standard, a greener, more digitally driven standard for construction. That's a powerful message, and it's one that other countries, other economies are going to pay attention to.
So it's not a matter of if this impacts the global construction industry, it's a matter of when.
Right. There's going to be pressure on other countries to follow suit, especially if they want to stay competitive in a world where sustainability and transparency are becoming more and more important.
It's really interesting to see how these kinds of regulations can have a domino effect. And it makes you wonder, what does this mean for everyone listening, whether you're an architect or just someone who cares about the future of our cities? This EU experiment, this is one to watch, to learn from, because it could very well be a glimpse into how we build our world for many years to come.